My younger brother Oliver walked in on me during a private moment, but strangely, I didn't mind, and I suspect he didn't either. It all began on a quiet Tuesday evening. The house was unusually calm, with our parents out for the night, leaving just the two of us. Oliver had always been the mischievous type, finding clever ways to irritate me when we were kids. However, over time, we'd settled into a more harmonious dynamic, and the tension between us had eased. I was home from college for fall break, my first visit in months. As soon as I stepped inside, memories came flooding back. My old room was mostly unchanged, though the posters had faded, and the desk was cluttered with items my parents had stored there over the years. It felt like stepping into the past, and I realized how much I'd missed the comfort of home. Oliver, however, had changed. I noticed it the moment he walked into the kitchen to greet me. He wasn't the scrawny, awkward boy I remembered from a few years ago. He'd grown taller, his demeanor more self-assured. He almost seemed like a different person, yet there was something familiar about him. "What?" he asked, catching me staring. "Nothing," I replied quickly, shaking my head. "You just look different." He grinned, scratching the back of his neck. "It's called growing up, Jennifer. You should try it sometime." I rolled my eyes but couldn't help smiling. He had a way of making everything feel light, as if nothing was ever too serious. But there was something else about him now, something I couldn't quite define. That night, after dinner and hours of catching up, I finally retreated to my room. The day had been exhausting. Traveling, unpacking, and dealing with the emotional whirlwind of being home after so long. All I wanted was a shower and a good night's sleep. My old bed creaked as I lay down, the mattress sagging in all the familiar spots. The house was quiet, except for the occasional sound of Oliver moving around in his room down the hall. I closed my eyes, letting the comfort of home wash over me, but sleep didn't come. Instead, my mind began to wander. It had been a long time since I'd experienced any kind of intimacy. College life was hectic, filled with more work than socializing, and I hadn't connected with anyone in months. Lying there in the dark, that realization weighed heavily on me. My body grew restless, and my thoughts spiraled into places I hadn't intended. Then, without warning, my mind fixated on Oliver. My breath caught as I recalled him standing in the kitchen earlier that evening. The way his shirt hugged his chest, the confidence in his smile, the warmth of his hug. At the time, I'd brushed it off, but now, in the silence of my room, those thoughts returned sharper and more vivid. What was wrong with me? This was Oliver, my little brother. I shouldn't be thinking about him like this. But the harder I tried to push the thoughts away, the more they intensified. My heart raced as I remembered the way he'd looked at me when I teased him, his eyes glinting with mischief. I imagined his voice, low and teasing, whispering my name. It wasn't just his appearance that had changed. There was a presence about him now, something impossible to ignore. I bit my lip, my body warming as my thoughts spiraled further. My hand slid under the blanket, hesitant at first, but soon I let myself sink into the moment. I closed my eyes, allowing the fantasy to take over, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt alive. But it didn't last long. I was completely lost in my own world when the door to my room swung open. "Jennifer!" Oliver's voice cut through the silence, and I froze, my heart stopping mid-beat. He stood in the doorway, his hand still on the knob, his eyes wide as they took in the scene. My face burned as I realized how exposed I was, my hands still under the blanket, my breathing heavy. I scrambled to sit up, pulling the blanket around me as if that could undo what he'd just seen. "What the hell, Oliver?" I shouted, my voice louder than I intended. "Ever heard of knocking?" I didn't know," he stammered, his face turning red as he looked away, scratching the back of his neck awkwardly. "I just wanted to see if you wanted to watch a movie or something." "Well, clearly I'm busy," I snapped, though my voice trembled with embarrassment. "And it's 11 p.m., Oliver. Go to bed." My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. He seemed torn between amusement and shock, his eyes flickering toward my sheets before he quickly looked away again. I'll leave you to it then," he muttered, turning to leave. But before he could close the door, I called out, "Wait." I wasn't sure why I said it. Maybe it was panic, or maybe it was the tension hanging in the air between us. Whatever it was, the word escaped before I could stop it. Oliver paused, his hand on the doorknob, and looked back at me. His expression was unreadable, his face still flushed. "What?" he asked. I hesitated, my mind racing for something to say, some way to salvage the situation. But the truth was, I didn't want him to leave. Not yet. "I'm sorry," I managed to say. "I didn't mean to yell." He gave a small nod, his eyes meeting mine briefly before darting away again. "It's fine," he said, his voice softer now. "I should have knocked." We stood there in silence, the tension between us thick and heavy. I could feel my pulse in my ears, my face still burning with embarrassment. But there was something else too. Something I couldn't quite name. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. "Do you want to come in?" I asked, the words slipping out before I could fully process them. Oliver raised an eyebrow, clearly caught off guard by the question. "Seriously?" I added quickly, though my voice wavered. "I mean, you're already here, so—" He paused for a moment, then stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He leaned against the wall, crossing his arms over his chest, his expression cautious but curious. "So," he said after a moment, "what exactly were you doing in here?" My face flushed again, and I groaned, pulling the blanket over my head. "Oh my God, can we not talk about it?" Oliver chuckled, the sound low and warm, and for some reason it made my chest tighten. "You're such a jerk," I muttered, peeking out from under the blanket. He grinned, his teasing smirk making my heart skip a beat. "Yeah, but you love me anyway." I didn't respond, but deep down I knew he wasn't wrong. The room felt smaller with Oliver in it, as if the air had grown heavier, making it harder to breathe. He was still leaning casually against the wall, arms crossed, that teasing smirk still playing on his lips. I couldn't tell if he was genuinely amused or just trying to lighten the mood, but either way, it wasn't working. My heart was still racing from the embarrassment of being caught, and I couldn't look him in the eye for more than a second without wanting to disappear under the blanket. "Relax, Jennifer," Oliver said, his voice softer now. "It's not like I haven't walked in on worse." "Worse?" I shot him a skeptical look, trying to regain some composure. "What's worse than seeing your sister doing? You know what?" He shrugged, his smirk widening. "Oh, I don't know. I once walked in on Dad trimming his nose hair, shirtless. Scarring, really." I couldn't help but laugh. A small, startled chuckle, but it was enough to ease some of the tension. Oliver grinned, clearly pleased with himself. And for a moment, things felt normal again. Like we were just two siblings hanging out without any awkwardness or unspoken tension. But the feeling didn't last. The silence that followed was heavy, and I could feel his gaze on me, watching me too closely. It made my skin prickle, as if he could see right through me, past the embarrassment and into the thoughts I was desperately trying to ignore. I pulled the blanket tighter around myself, as if it could shield me from whatever was happening between us. "So, Oliver," I began, my tone deliberately casual, "who were you thinking about?" His head snapped up, and he stared at me, his face burning. "No one. I wasn't. What kind of question is that?" He shrugged, his expression annoyingly calm. "I'm just saying, you looked pretty into it. Must have been someone special." It was as if he knew. "Oliver!" I threw a pillow at him, which he caught easily, laughing. "Can you stop?" "Fine, fine," he said, holding up his hands in mock surrender, still grinning. But then his laughter faded, and his expression turned more serious. "I'm just messing with you, Jennifer. You don't have to freak out." "Yeah, well, maybe don't barge into my room unannounced next time," I muttered, running a hand through my hair. "Noted," he said. And for a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched on, and I found myself staring at him, taking in the way the soft light from my bedside lamp highlighted the curve of his jaw and the way his hair fell slightly into his eyes. He had always been a good-looking kid, but now he looked different, older, more confident. It was disorienting, like I was seeing him for the first time. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Oliver's voice broke through my thoughts, and I realized too late that I'd been staring. "I wasn't," I started, but he raised an eyebrow, cutting me off. "Yeah, you were," I groaned, pulling the blanket over my head again. "Just go away, Oliver." "Nope," he said. "Not until you tell me what's going on." "There's nothing going on," I shouted, my voice muffled by the blanket. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. There was something going on, something I didn't understand, something I couldn't even begin to put into words. And the way he was looking at me now, like he could see straight through me, wasn't helping. Oliver moved closer, sitting on the edge of the bed. I felt the mattress dip under his weight, and my heart skipped a beat. I peeked out from under the blanket, and he was right there, his face just inches from mine, his expression unreadable, his eyes searching mine as if he was trying to figure something out. "You're acting weird," he said quietly. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," I muttered, but my voice lacked conviction. "Jennifer," he said, his tone soft but firm. "Come on, talk to me." I hesitated, my chest tightening. I didn't know how to explain what I was feeling, didn't know how to put it into words without sounding completely insane. How was I supposed to tell him that I couldn't stop thinking about him, that he'd been in my head all night, that even now, sitting so close, he was all I could think about? "I don't know what's wrong with me," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's like I'm thinking things I shouldn't be thinking. About you." The words hung in the air between us, and I felt my stomach twist. I couldn't believe I'd actually said it out loud. I braced myself for his reaction, for him to pull away, laugh it off, or get angry. But he didn't do any of those things. Instead, he stayed right where he was, his expression unreadable. "What kind of things?" he asked, his voice quiet. as if he wasn't surprised by what I'd said. I hesitated, my throat tight. Things I shouldn't be thinking, I repeated, my eyes fixed on the blanket. I don't know why. It just happened. Oliver was silent for a long moment, and I could feel my chest tightening with every second that passed. But then, to my surprise, he reached out, his hand resting lightly on my arm. The touch was gentle, almost hesitant, but it sent a jolt through me all the same. "Jennifer," he said softly, his voice steady. "It's okay." I looked up at him, my heart pounding. "It is?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, his hand still on my arm. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and full of meaning. "Yeah, it's okay." Oliver's voice was steady, calm, but the weight of what he'd just said made my chest tighten. I wasn't sure if I'd heard him right, if he really meant it, or if he was just trying to ease the awkwardness between us. But the way he was looking at me, so steady, so sure, made me think he wasn't just saying it to make me feel better. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was thick but not uncomfortable, as if we were both waiting for the other to make the next move, to say something that would break the tension or push things forward. "Oliver," I started, my voice shaky. "I don't know what's wrong with me," I said, my voice trembling. He tilted his head slightly, his gaze never leaving mine. "Why do you think something's wrong with you?" he asked. "Because this isn't normal," I blurted out, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "You're my little brother. You're my family. I shouldn't—" "Don't," he interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. His hand moved from my arm to my shoulder, squeezing lightly. "Don't do that. Don't make it sound like you're broken or something. You're not." I blinked, caught off guard by his words, but he didn't let me respond. "Jennifer, you're not some kind of freak. You're just feeling something, and that's okay." I stared at him, my heart pounding. The way he was looking at me, the way he spoke, it was like he wasn't just trying to comfort me. There was something else there, something deeper. I didn't know what it was, but it made my chest ache in a way I couldn't explain. "Why aren't you freaking out about this?" I asked, my voice shaking. "You should be freaking out." He gave a small shrug, his lips quirking into a faint smile. "Maybe I'm just better at keeping my cool than you are." "Oliver," I started, but he cut me off again. "Jennifer, do you trust me?" The question took me by surprise. "Of course I trust you," I said. "Then trust me when I say this doesn't have to be a big deal," he said softly. "It's just us. No one else has to know. No one else has to understand. It's just you and me." His words sent a shiver through me, and I felt my chest tighten. The way he said it, so calm and sure, made it sound so simple. But it wasn't simple. It was complicated and messy and terrifying. And yet, the way he was looking at me, the way his hand rested on my shoulder made it feel like maybe it didn't have to be. "Oliver," I said, my voice barely audible. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't care if it's normal or not," he replied, his voice steady. "I care about you, and if this is something you're feeling, then maybe I feel it too." My breath caught in my throat, and I stared at him, my mind racing. Did he really mean that? Was he really saying what I thought he was saying? I didn't know how to respond, didn't know what to do. All I knew was that my heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. Before I could stop myself, I reached out, my hand brushing against his. He didn't pull away. Instead, his fingers curled around mine, his touch warm and steady. The simple gestures sent a wave of relief, and something deeper, something I didn't want to name, washing over me. I don't know what to do, I admitted, my voice trembling. I don't even know what this is. Me neither, he said, his voice soft. But maybe we don't have to know. Maybe we just figure it out together. His words made my chest ache, and I felt my eyes sting. I didn't know why I was so emotional, why his words hit me so hard. But they did. I nodded slowly, squeezing his hand. Okay. For a moment, neither of us moved. We just sat there, our hands clasped, the silence between us filled with unspoken understanding. It was like the world had faded away, leaving just the two of us, caught in this moment that felt both impossible and inevitable. And then, before I could overthink it, I leaned in. The kiss was soft, hesitant, like we were both testing the waters. His lips were warm, and I could feel the faint tremor in his hand as he held mine. It wasn't perfect. There was a clumsiness to it, a nervousness that came from the uncertainty of what we were doing. But it was real. It was us. When we pulled back, his eyes met mine, and I saw the same mix of emotions I was feeling. Fear, hope, and something that felt a lot like relief. Neither of us said anything, but we didn't need to. In that moment, everything we couldn't put into words was written in the way we looked at each other. Oliver gave me a small smile, his hand still holding mine. See, not so scary, he said. I laughed softly, the sound shaky but genuine. Speak for yourself, I muttered. He grinned, and for the first time all night, I felt like maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. The room felt electric after that kiss, like the air between us had changed in some irreversible way. My heart was still racing, my mind struggling to catch up with what had just happened. Oliver was quiet, his gaze steady as he watched me, and for the first time in a long time I couldn't read him. He wasn't laughing, teasing, or brushing it off. He was just there, present in a way that made my chest ache. Did that feel wrong to you? He asked softly, breaking the silence. I shook my head, my voice caught in my throat. No, I whispered. It didn't. Good, he said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Because it didn't feel wrong to me either. I exhaled shakily, the weight of his words settling over me. I'd spent so much time convincing myself that these feelings were unnatural, something to be ashamed of. But hearing him say that, hearing him validate what I was feeling made it all seem a little less terrifying. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Oliver shrugged, his smile fading into something softer, more vulnerable. I don't know. I've never done this before, Jennifer, but I think we just take it one step at a time. Figure it out as we go. His words were simple, but they carried so much weight. I nodded slowly, my fingers still intertwined with his. Okay. For a moment, neither of us moved. We just sat there, our hands clasped, the silence between us comforting. It was like we were finally on the same page, finally letting go of all the unspoken tension that had been building for so long. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe. Do you want to talk about it? Oliver asked, after a pause, his voice careful. Talk about what? I replied. About why you've been acting so strange lately, he said, a small smile playing on his lips. Let's be honest, Jennifer. You've been acting off. I groaned, pulling my hand away from his to cover my face. I don't know, I admitted, my voice muffled. It's just everything about you feels different now, and it's confusing me. Different how? He asked, leaning in slightly. I hesitated, my cheeks heating up. You're not the same annoying kid I grew up with, I finally said. You're confident, grown up, and I don't know how to deal with that. Oliver's smile widened, a playful glint returning to his eyes. So what you're saying is, you think I'm hot? Oh my God, stop! I groaned, throwing a pillow at him. He caught it easily, laughing, and the sound made my chest tighten in a way that was both comforting and frustrating. He leaned closer and kissed me again, briefly. I'm just saying, he teased, tossing the pillow back onto the bed. You could have just said that instead of making it so dramatic. Yeah, well, I'm not exactly thrilled about it, I muttered, though my lips curled into a reluctant smile. It felt like we were joking around, but there was also an undercurrent of teasing. Oliver's laughter faded, and his expression grew softer. You don't have to be ashamed, Jennifer, he said quietly. It's just us. No one else has to know. I nodded, my throat tight. Yeah, I said softly. Just us. But as I spoke, he lay down beside me, and without a word, he moved his fingers to where I had left off. It was incredible. I had never felt anything like it before. As he continued, I lost control and asked him to go further, and he did. I won't go into details, but let's just say it was one of the most intense nights of my life. When it was over and we both lay there, I could tell we both understood what had just happened. In some ways, it felt wrong, but in others, it felt like the best thing I had ever experienced. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Something had changed between us. The tension was still there, but it wasn't as heavy. It was like we'd taken the first step into something new and uncertain. And now we were just trying to figure out how to navigate it. Oliver stayed in my room for a while, sitting on the edge of the bed as we talked about everything and nothing. It felt like old times, back when we were kids staying up late, whispering secrets to each other in the dark. But now, there was something deeper beneath the surface, something neither of us fully understood. When he finally left to go to his own room, I felt both relieved and strangely empty. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of him, the way he'd kissed me, the way his hand had felt in mine, the way he'd looked at me like I was the only thing that mattered. It was overwhelming, but impossible to ignore. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. For a moment, I thought it was our parents, but then I remembered they were away for the weekend. It was just me and Oliver. I got out of bed and headed downstairs, my heart pounding at the thought of seeing him again. I wasn't sure what to expect. Awkwardness, maybe, or tension. But when I walked into the kitchen and saw him sitting at the table with a bowl of cereal, he looked completely normal. Too normal. Morning, he said, flashing me a grin. Sleep well? Yeah, I replied, grabbing a mug and pouring myself some coffee. Like a baby, he said, his tone light. But when I sat down across from him, I noticed the way his eyes lingered on me just a little too long, the way his smile softened slightly. It made my chest tighten all over again. We ate breakfast in relative silence, the occasional clink of spoons against bowls filling the air. I could sense his eyes on me, making it nearly impossible to concentrate on anything else. My mind kept replaying everything from the night before. The kiss, the way he had looked at me afterward, as though I was no longer just his sister, but something more. It was both thrilling and terrifying. I was so lost in my thoughts that I didn't hear him come back downstairs. And when he sat beside me, I flinched slightly, startled by his sudden appearance. "Sorry," he murmured, a small smirk forming on his lips. "Didn't mean to startle you." "It's fine," I replied quickly, though my heart was still racing. For a while, we sat there in silence, the dim glow of the TV casting flickering light across the room. Neither of us spoke, yet the tension was unmistakable. I could feel him stealing glances at me from the corner of his eye, and a shiver ran down my spine. "Jennifer," he suddenly said, breaking the silence, his voice carrying a weight that made my chest tighten. "Can we talk?" I turned to face him, my breath catching. "About what?" I asked hesitantly. "About us," he said, his gaze steady. "About last night." My stomach twisted uneasily. I wasn't sure I was prepared for this conversation, but I nodded anyway. He hesitated, running his fingers through his hair before speaking again. "I've been thinking about it all day," he admitted. "About what happened, about what it means." "And," I prompted, my voice barely above a whisper, "and I think." He trailed off, his cheeks tinged with color. "I think I don't want to pretend it didn't happen." His words sent a sharp jolt through me, and I stared at him, my heart pounding. "You don't?" He shook his head, locking eyes with mine. "No, I don't. Because it didn't feel wrong, Jennifer. It felt right." The certainty in his voice made my chest ache. I parted my lips to speak, but no words came. I didn't know how to express the tangle of emotions swirling inside me. All I knew was that he was looking at me like I was the only thing that mattered, and the intensity of it made me want to cry. "I'm scared, Oliver," I finally admitted, my voice unsteady. "This is all so new, and I don't know what to do." "You don't have to," he said gently. "We'll figure it out together." He reached out, his fingers grazing mine, and at that simple touch, a shiver coursed through me. I glanced down at our hands, then back up at him, my throat tight. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've never been more certain of anything," he answered, his tone unwavering. "I care about you, Jennifer, more than I probably should, but I'm done pretending I don't." His words hit me like a tidal wave, and before I could stop myself, I leaned in, closing the space between us. The kiss started soft, hesitant, but it quickly deepened as every emotion I'd suppressed came surging to the surface. His hands found my shoulders, drawing me closer, and my heart swelled with something I couldn't quite name. When we finally pulled apart, I rested my forehead against his, my breath coming in short, shaky gasps. "What do we do now?" I whispered, my voice unsteady. "We keep this between us," he said softly. "We take it slow and figure it out." I nodded slowly, my chest tight. "Okay." For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't ashamed. All I felt was him, his warmth, his presence, his unwavering support. And that was enough. That night, as we lay side by side on the couch, the TV still playing softly in the background, I came to a realization. What we had might not have been conventional, might not have been something anyone else could understand, but it was ours. And for now, that was enough. I know my story might seem strange to some people, but I'm happy.